I never felt like my life was stolen. That's what makes this harder to admit. No one forced me. No one threatened me. No one stood in my way and said I wasn't allowed to choose. If you asked me back then, I would have said I was lucky. Supported. Surrounded by people who cared. And yet, somehow, my life stopped feeling like it belonged to me. It happened quietly, disguised as cooperation. I learned early that being agreeable made things easier. When I listened, doors stayed open. When I adapted, conflicts dissolved. When I followed advice, people relaxed around me. Approval came easily, not loud praise, but a steady sense that I was doing things right. I mistook that feeling for direction. Whenever a decision appeared, there was always someone ready to help. Someone older. Someone wiser. Someone more confident. They told me what made sense, what was realistic, what was safe. Their certainty felt comforting, especially when mine was fragile. So I let them decide. Not because I was weak, but because I was unsure, and uncertainty felt dangerous. I told myself I was learning. That one day I would understand enough to choose for myself. Until then, I borrowed confidence from others and called it guidance. Guidance turned into habit. I stopped asking what I wanted and started asking what would be approved. I learned how to phrase my choices so they sounded reasonable instead of honest. I filtered my instincts through expectations until they no longer sounded like instincts at all. People praised me for being thoughtful. Mature. Easy to advise. I didn't realize I was becoming invisible inside my own decisions. At first, it felt responsible. I avoided mistakes others had made. I chose paths with proven outcomes. I didn't waste time chasing things that might not work. My life progressed smoothly, without drama or disruption. That smoothness became my proof that I was doing the right thing. But something strange happened along the way. The more I followed advice, the quieter my inner voice became. Not silent, just hesitant. Like it was waiting for permission to speak. When it did surface, it sounded uncertain, easily overridden by logic or reassurance. I learned to trust explanations more than feelings. If something didn't feel right, I assumed I was being unrealistic. If I felt restless, I blamed impatience. If I wanted something that didn't fit the plan, I told myself I didn't understand enough yet. I always assumed understanding would come later. Later became a place I never arrived at. Years passed in a sequence of sensible choices. Each one defendable. Each one aligned with what others expected of me. I built a life that worked, stable, predictable, respectable. And yet, I felt like a guest in it. There were moments when that feeling surfaced unexpectedly. Watching someone else make a bold decision and feeling a sharp, irrational ache. Being asked a simple question, "What do you want?" And realizing I needed time to translate the answer into something acceptable. I told myself everyone feels that way sometimes. I ignored it. The truth is, I had outsourced my agency so gradually that I didn't notice when it was gone. Decisions were still being made, just not by me. I was agreeing, adjusting, adapting, nodding. I wasn't choosing. And the scariest part? Nothing was wrong enough to justify stopping. My life didn't collapse. I wasn't miserable. I wasn't suffering dramatically. I was functional. Productive. Reliable. The kind of person others trusted with responsibility. But responsibility without authorship turns into obedience. I started to feel tired in a way rest didn't fix. Not burned out, hollow. Like I was carrying a role instead of a self. I fulfilled expectations efficiently, but nothing felt personal anymore. I realized I spoke about my life the way people speak about schedules. Busy. Fine. Manageable. Never alive. One evening, after a long day of doing everything that was expected of me, I sat alone and felt an unfamiliar wave of grief. Not for something that had happened, but for something that hadn't. I couldn't name a single decision I had made recently that felt undeniably mine. That realization unsettled me deeply. Because it meant that if I continued like this, my life would keep moving forward, but I wouldn't be inside it. I would become someone people described accurately while knowing almost nothing about. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years: when was the last time I chose something without checking whether it made sense to someone else first? I couldn't answer. That's when the thought finally surfaced, clear and frightening: what if this isn't guidance anymore? What if this is surrender? I didn't know yet how to reclaim my voice. I only knew that letting others decide had cost me something essential, not all at once, but quietly, politely, over time. And for the first time, I wondered whether the life I was living was truly mine, or just the sum of everyone else's certainty. Once the thought this might be surrender appeared, it didn't leave me alone. It followed me through ordinary days, through conversations I had learned to navigate automatically, through decisions that looked small on the surface but felt heavy inside. I started noticing how often my first instinct was not what do I want, but what will make this easier for everyone else. That instinct had become reflex. I realized how rarely I acted without rehearsing justification in my head. Even simple choices passed through filters: practicality, optics, approval. By the time a decision reached the outside world, it was already diluted enough to be safe. Safe for them. Invisible for me. I began to feel a quiet resentment that surprised me. Not anger, resentment without a target. I wasn't angry at the people who advised me. Most of them meant well. They cared. They believed they were helping. What I resented was how easily I had let their certainty replace my responsibility. Every time something went wrong, I could tell myself I had followed good advice. Every time something felt empty, I could blame circumstance instead of choice. Borrowed decisions came with borrowed accountability. And that had been comforting. But comfort has a cost when it lasts too long. I noticed how often I said, "I don't know," when asked about my own preferences. Where I wanted to live. What I wanted to do next. What mattered to me. I could talk fluently about expectations, opportunities, logical steps. I struggled to talk about myself. The first real internal conflict arrived when someone close to me, someone who had guided me for years, offered advice that felt wrong immediately. Not dangerous. Not harmful. Just wrong for me. I felt it in my body before I could explain it. A resistance that didn't have language yet. And for the first time, I didn't dismiss it. I nodded politely, like always. I said I'd think about it. But something inside me refused to cooperate. I didn't feel relieved after the conversation. I felt suffocated. That reaction scared me. Because it meant my instincts were still alive, and they were angry. I spent nights replaying past choices, not with regret, but with curiosity. I asked myself which decisions I would make again if no one had an opinion about them. The answers were uncomfortable. Some of the biggest milestones in my life suddenly felt borrowed. Not wrong, just not authored. They had happened to me more than through me. That realization hurt in a slow, persistent way. I began to understand why disappointing others felt so terrifying to me. It wasn't just fear of conflict. It was fear of losing structure. When you let others decide long enough, their approval becomes the scaffolding holding your identity together. If I stopped agreeing, what would be left? That question terrified me. I imagined saying no. Choosing differently. Acting without explanation. The images came with immediate consequences in my mind: disappointment, confusion, distance. I saw people recalibrating their expectations, seeing me differently. And beneath all of that, a deeper fear surfaced: what if I choose for myself and discover I'm wrong? As long as I followed advice, mistakes were shared. If I chose alone, failure would belong entirely to me. That responsibility felt enormous. So I hesitated. I hovered in that space for a long time, aware enough to be uncomfortable, but not brave enough to change. Awareness sharpened the discomfort instead of resolving it. I could see the pattern clearly now, and that made continuing it feel dishonest. I started to notice physical signs of the conflict. Tension that didn't go away. Fatigue that sleep didn't fix. A constant sense of being slightly misaligned with my own life. People still saw me as composed. Capable. Reliable. They didn't see the internal negotiation happening constantly, the quiet debate between who I was expected to be and who I was becoming aware of. The pressure built slowly. One evening, after another conversation where I had agreed to something that felt wrong, I felt something snap, not dramatically, but decisively. I realized I was more afraid of disappointing others than of losing myself. That realization stunned me. Because it meant I had assigned more value to harmony than to identity. I had treated belonging as more important than authorship. I had chosen to be understandable instead of authentic. I saw clearly then that letting others decide wasn't neutral. It had shaped my life in ways I had never consciously agreed to. Their values had become default. Their fears had influenced my caution. Their definitions of success had guided my direction. Not maliciously, but completely. And once I saw that, continuing felt like consent. I didn't suddenly rebel. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't declare independence. What changed was quieter. I stopped immediately agreeing. That pause, that single moment of hesitation before saying yes, felt revolutionary. It gave my instincts space to surface before being overridden. Sometimes they were messy. Sometimes unclear. But they were mine. The pause changed everything. Because it showed me how often I had been bypassing myself out of habit. How quickly I had learned to defer. How rarely I had trusted my own internal signal. I realized then that reclaiming my life wouldn't start with big decisions. It would start with resisting the reflex to surrender. And that meant something frightening. Some people would be disappointed. Some advice would go unused. Some paths would close. I didn't know yet how to live with that. I only knew that if I didn't start choosing, imperfectly, awkwardly, without consensus, my life would continue to move forward as a series of well-managed decisions that never truly belonged to me. And that felt like a loss I couldn't afford anymore.